Cuyahoga Valley National Park is the only national park in the state of Ohio and one of 3 in the Great Lakes region, along with Michigan's Isle Royale and the Indiana Dunes. And right off the bat, I want to draw some comparisons with the Indiana Dunes because Cuyahoga similarly has a bit of a mixed reputation, with many stating its scenery doesn't warrant national park status. At the end of the video, I'll discuss whether or not I believe that to be true, but first, I made my first ever visit on June 5th, 2024. It was part of a much larger theme park focused trip for my other channel Coaster Dash, and happened to be in between Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, and a much smaller park known as Waldemere in Erie, Pennsylvania. Therefore, Cuyahoga Valley can be found in the northeast corner of the state, just 15 minutes south of Cleveland. This makes it the rare urban national park, including a dense road network and small towns right outside its borders. The 32,783-acre park was designated a national recreation area in 1974, but eventually redesignated to a national park in the year 2000. Interestingly, this makes it the only national park that originated as a national recreation area. So there's your history lesson, but where exactly does Cuyahoga Valley get its name from? Well, the name Cuyahoga comes from Native Americans who once inhabited the area and means crooked river. That's because the Cuyahoga River runs through the park and is basically why this valley exists. Though I couldn't find any images, driving towards the park reveals a significant change in elevation, as all the land in Cuyahoga Valley naturally is lower than its surroundings. And these subtle changes in elevation are the reason for over 100 waterfalls that call this park home. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these cannot be reached by hiking trail, causing adventurous travelers to be forced to go off the beaten path to find them. Further, they typically dry up early in the summer, going well into the fall, so it's really only worth scouting these out in the spring or winter. Understand that I did not plan this trip around Cuyahoga Valley, but if I had, summer would most definitely have not been the season I'd visited in. But nevertheless, this is a great segue to our first stop in the park and easily the most iconic place to visit, Brandywine Falls. Though one can extend their hike along Brandywine Creek, the trail we took to the falls was super short and actually really well built. It was an elevated boardwalk taking you into a lush green forest alongside these fascinating rock formations, which we'll talk about later. An observation deck then provides a great view looking out at the 60-foot high Brandywine Falls. Despite what you hear about this park, this is a legitimately stunning waterfall that stands out much more because of its width and shape as opposed to its height. I love how it makes its way a bunch of little steps, something that might not be as prevalent when the waterfall is flowing at a greater volume. Speaking of which, it's to my understanding that this is a pretty standard flow rate for Brandywine in the month of June. It would have been cool to see the left side with more water, as the falls can look quite a bit wider as a result, but that never even crossed my mind while I was here because I was still in awe at how nice this waterfall was. Especially for Ohio, I don't think the state is often thought of as having a whole lot of waterfalls on this scale. I would recommend continuing up the trail and looping back around to the parking lot, as you can get a few upper viewpoints, including one from the very top of the falls. Certainly, if you could only visit one area of the park, I'd suggest Brandywine Falls before any of the other locations we went to. But that's not to say our next spot wasn't worth the visit, as it too was actually quite cool. The Ledges Trail is a mostly flat 2.3-mile loop with sporadic bits of elevation gain. Despite its length, I'd consider it a really easy hike and was maybe my favorite experience in the park from the angle of its uniqueness. The trail takes you around a sandstone outcrop with towering cliffs, something I didn't expect to see in this park. Though ironically, it's probably the second most well-known natural feature of Cuyahoga Valley behind its waterfalls. They formed as a result of millions of years of soaking seas and rivers, along with glaciers, forming, erasing, and reshaping the land into the rock ledges you see today. It's actually a very similar history as to how the dells of the Wisconsin River formed if you've seen my video from there. Once again, I was actually quite impressed by the way this trail was designed, as it allows you to get lots of different vantages of the rock formations. Plus, you can take several spur trails in between the cliffs in what are some surprisingly excellent examples of slot canyons. It isn't super well marked if you do partake in these spur trails, but as long as you're walking to the right of the rocks, you're going the right way. Eventually, the trail does wrap its way to the top of a hill in what is supposed to be a grand last impression of the hike. Unfortunately though, trees mostly block what was once a sprawling view of Cuyahoga Valley, which is a shame because overlooks are one thing I felt this park was missing. After completing the hike, we made our way to Viaduct Park, located just outside park boundaries. No joke, all that separates its parking lot from the national park is a railroad track, so for all intents and purposes it still counts as Cuyahoga Valley in my mind. Our reason for stopping here is the short walk down to Tinker's Creek Falls, or as it's more commonly known, Great Falls of Tinker's Creek. Though it only possesses a height of around 20 feet, it's one of Ohio's widest waterfalls at 80 feet across. With a greater flow volume in the spring or winter, its width would be far more apparent, but as you can see by my footage, the most water flowing was definitely on the left-hand side. The portions on the right were still pretty, but far less violent and probably reduced to a trickle later in the summer. Overall, I found it well worth the visit though, particularly because there are far more advantages compared to Brandywine Falls. There's an unpaved extended trail you can take to the base, and that was definitely fun. I really enjoyed rock hopping until I got as close to the falls as I possibly could. But ultimately, like many waterfalls here, I'd love to return and see them in greater flow volume. Alright, nice short visit to Cuyahoga Valley National Park, my 33rd national park here in Ohio. Yeah, I had a good time here. I mean, it's far from the most grand of the national parks, and certainly it's one of the weakest ones. If I'm comparing it to my least favorite national park at Indiana Dunes, I'd probably take this one a hair over it because I feel like there's more variety here. I mean, I really enjoyed everything I saw. It's just on a national park scale, it's not the most impressive. But yeah, the waterfalls and the Ledges Trail, a lot of fun. I mentioned this earlier, but coming to Cuyahoga Valley wasn't a priority on this trip. However, despite visiting in the summer, I absolutely do not regret visiting my 33rd national park. Judging by what I did see, I have to agree with the consensus that Cuyahoga by no means lives up to other national parks. All of the others I've been to out east vastly surpass this park, except for Indiana Dunes, which I'd rank very closely. The question of which park is better or worse is an extremely difficult one. I don't doubt that I'd prefer this park in the spring season due to its abundant collection of waterfalls, but its scenery otherwise is rather generic for this region of America. Indiana Dunes I at least felt was unique to the state, but there were some other external factors that dampened my experience there. Namely, the ugly infrastructure which surrounds the park and the fact that you have to drive through towns to get from one section to another. Compare that to Cuyahoga Valley, where sure there's development all around the park, but within it, not so much, and you don't have the buildings or steel plants or whatever to take you out of the immersion. And I will say, I greatly approve of the protection of this park as I think it's so important for people, including and maybe especially for those in cities, to have a break every once in a while and be able to appreciate the outdoors. But I'd much rather it be revoked to national recreation areas. I do feel there are more spectacular areas in this part of the country. As far as Ohio's concerned, further south in the Wayne National Forest, it looks like there'd be some great hiking, plus I've heard great things about Hocking Hill State Park. Better yet, surrounding states like West Virginia or Kentucky contain far greater hiking opportunities, and I think you could make an argument for Pennsylvania too. But hey, Cuyahoga Valley still made for a nice couple of hours, and I'd recommend a short visit if you happen to be nearby. Let me know in the comments if you've been to Cuyahoga Valley what you thought of it and whether or not you believe it should be a national park. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Travel Dash for more content in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.